Well, hello, folks. Thank you for joining us again for one of these very important conversations around racial reconciliation. I'm joined again by Dr. and Petrina Branch, and you've heard introductions from them and about them over these conversations. If you haven't had a chance, I invite you, can't encourage you enough to go back and watch those previous conversations. Also, whenever these videos are put out, what you will see is a whole list of resources. And I'm sure in this conversation, there will be more articles or books or films or something that is referred to. And I just want you to know that we will list those resources as well. And so right now there's probably a list of about 40 running resources for you to continue your education. And we're joined today by some friends from First United Methodist Church, Chula Vista, Eric and Rexana Swanson and Jennifer Cole. And so I'm going to stop talking and we're going to jump into this conversation. So welcome everyone. We're thankful. We're thankful that you've joined us. Want to begin with a question that we talked some about last week, but want to touch on it again. And let me just read the question. Are there things, and this for the branches, are there things that you are hearing from allies attempting to be helpful that are actually hurtful or causing more damage to the movement or to individuals than are helping?
What comes to mind is sometimes the insistence of people wanting to be allies who insist on the folks who are the recipients of their help responding in ways that they expect. And the reality is that sometimes people may not respond in ways that we expect them to, or that we think they should. We are all different human beings. We all have different backgrounds, different experiences that have contributed to who we are and what our responses might be to all sorts of things, including systemic racial injustice in our society, racial oppression in our society. And so when people come alongside to help, it seems to me they might be ready for rejection from the very people that they may be trying to help. And what is problematic is insisting, I'm trying to help you, you need to accept me. I'm trying to help you, I'm trying to offer my time, my energy, my money, my whatever, and I expect for you to behave in this, that, or the other way. That is problematic. Allies need to be listening. They need to be open to people responding in ways that are comfortable, appropriate for them. And if the allies would think about it and listen to some others, they may see how some of those responses are understandable.
I just wanted to add, some of the aspects of being a good ally, and there's numerous articles on the internet about this, but basically, listening more than speaking. I mean, essentially, to be a good ally, you need to really listen deeply to what, the Black people that you're working with or are saying. What are their needs? You need to be more of be there to say, how can I help? As opposed to, sort of trying to take over. Do your research, and that's why I appreciate, the people who have listened to the various conversations we've had, and and have followed up by reviewing some of the reference materials that we've referred to, so you can understand what the history is and what the concerns are, and also just understand your own white privilege, the way you've benefited from the system, and just any effort to just do self-examination to understand essentially how the system works that favors one group and disfavors in other groups. Also, it's important for allies to talk to their children about racism. We won't, as a community or as a nation, move forward towards anti-racism until we have these conversations like we're having, and our children are also part of that. And I guess the last thing I just want to say is you need to be prepared for the long term, to commit to working for social justice and change, even after the height of the protests are over.
Yes.
Protests are still continuing related to George Floyd's death, but they're not, in the headlines, they're not as, great as they were a few weeks ago. But, this is actually the more important time now. Not, I should say more important. That was very important. But what's very important right now is that all that energy, all those concerns get implemented, whether it's in legislation, whether it's in change in institutions at schools, changes in the criminal justice system. And so I just hope as allies that one doesn't say, okay, I marched, I'm good, I covered it, or I did my part. We need people to continue. And it's not always clear what the way is to continue, but certainly in your everyday life, as you encounter people you deal with who are doing things or saying things that are racist or are not helpful, certainly you should vote. And obviously you should educate yourselves as to who you should vote for and what policies and they're suggesting that would move this cause forward. So those are just some of the qualities of good ally. And to the extent people do not do some of the things I suggest, they're not really allies.
Yes.
Not allies.
Yeah, that's helpful. And let's talk a little bit more about allies. So as we're having this conversation, this is Saturday morning, the July 18th. There's a number of people from our congregation who will be involved in San Diego Pride events, allies with another community this afternoon. And Roxana was sharing with me before the recording started some questions about different groups coming together and how helpful that is. So Roxana, maybe we could ask that question and see where that takes the conversation.
Okay. So this being Pride weekend, and it just happened to be the same time that we were going to be on this recording, it occurred to me to wonder about this most recent movement with the police brutality and all of the protest. It seems that some of the other social justice groups, like LGBTQ groups and immigrant groups, have kind of aligned themselves to this movement right now, the Black Lives Matter movement, excuse me. And in fact, I know up in LA, the Pride Parade, said this is going to be a Black Lives Matter. And I just wondered if the civil rights in general groups welcome that alignment, whether they feel it is a distraction or a diluting the message by having these other groups align with that. And so I was just kind of wondering if the NAACP and the other civil rights groups across the country welcomed that kind of alignment. right now at this time?
I think I would say rather emphatically, it depends.
Okay.
And it depends on how these groups come together and what would be the result, the implications for folks who are right now focused on police brutality and addressing systemic racial injustice. What happens to that? Does race and racism now take a back seat to LGBTQ issues? Historically, what has happened when white people get involved with Black movements, the conversation changes. And race and racism somehow get pushed to the side, pushed to the back, and issues that aren't so incendiary to some white people come to the fore. Another thing that often happens, so what often happens is people stop talking about race and they begin talking about poverty, for example. They stop talking about race and they begin talking about, well, LGBTQ issues. That somehow, or sexism.
Yeah.
Those things become somehow more important. And in my view, it's because those things for white people are easier to deal with than constantly talking about race and how we can get our society focused on race towards eradication of racism. That's a whole different discussion. Historically, what has happened, and you can look at this, for example, in the women's
Me Too movement?
suffragette movement. Black women were involved in that movement.
Yep.
Thousands of Black women across the country were involved in that movement. But we don't see their pictures. We don't hear their stories. We don't hear and see them in this larger suffragette movement.
And it wasn't until the 60s until that was recognized. So there was a delay, right?
Yeah.
Well, Black women were involved in that movement.
Yes. But I mean,
Right.
From its inception.
Sure, but they weren't even recognized to be able to vote until later.
Well, yes. Being able to vote is another part of that issue, but I'm talking about just being a part of
being recognized
the
in
movement
general.
to get that vote. So that's just one example. There are numerous examples of white people in the 60s. Another example, just joining Black Power movements and wanting to take over those movements, assuming that they should be in control. And that is a phenomenon that we see often. White people taking over whatever group they join, whether it's a Black group or a Latino group or some other kind of group. There is the assumption, a researcher at Stanford University, Elizabeth Cohen, research this phenomenon with Black students and white students working together in groups. And she called it the interracial, it'll come to me. But essentially it was this phenomenon that when white people and Black people collaborate, both white folks and Black folks assume that white people will become the leaders, will take charge, will take over the group. And that's often what happens.
Yeah.
Interracial interaction disability, that's what she called it. Interracial interaction disability. And it is a result of the racism that exists in our society. The assumption that white people are intelligent, white people can be the leaders, white people can take over and be in charge. And what Black people have tried to say in a number of ways for generations is, we know what we're doing. If you want to help, that's just fine, but do not come into our organizations, our groups, and assume that you will then be in charge. It is disrespectful, to say the least, and there is racism involved in it.
Yeah.
I just want to add that the NAACP joins coalitions and works with various groups on various issues. I mean, I can't really speak to what the NAACP would say about any particular combination of groups, as you mentioned, but I just want to give a current example. The NAACP nationally is part of related to Facebook. There is a coalition of groups, including NAACP, that has called for companies to stop advertising on the Facebook at this time because they feel that Facebook has not done a very good job of taking off false, misleading, and racist material from their site. And I don't know if you've heard about it, but various companies have stopped advertising, at least for the month of July, because of that.
Okay.
Well, that sort of effort was, the NAACP was in coalition with other groups for that. So the NAACP is concerned about so many different issues in this country, from education to voting to housing to police issues, that it's important that at times they do work with other groups, from coalition to groups, to try to address the issues. But as has already been said, there certainly is a need that the focus of those coalitions, be on, our issues.
Yes,
and
it shouldn't be lost.
And doesn't get, too diluted or lost in the process. So there is certainly efforts when we do coalesce with other groups to be clear on what the goals are and how it's going to be accomplished.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to remind us as well that dealing with oppressions of various kinds is intersectional work.
Yep.
All of us need, with our various emphases for addressing oppressions of different kinds, all of us need allies across the lines of our emphasis, of our focus. We need allies of all kinds, because the ways in which we are diminished, devalued, oppressed are similar. And so we need to be addressing all kinds of oppression. And certainly when groups of us from who are involved in addressing different issues come together, well, we are a more powerful and formidable group than if we were to stand alone. But you know, I would not go into your house and take over your house. That's your house, not my house. I am a heterosexual male. Homosexual males know their issues, can better voice their issues, should take the lead on their issues. And if I can lend support, wonderful. Women have been fighting sexism in this country for years, and they've been joined by a number of men addressing sexism. I should not be the spokesperson for issues of sexism in our society. Women know those issues best. They should be at the forefront, and I should be asking, what can I do to help? And if those women say absolutely nothing, sit down, then that's what I need to do. Sit down.
Right. Yes. Yeah, thank you. And so I want us to take this ally conversation to look at another piece of it. So certainly part of being an ally, as we've talked about it, is educating yourself to the issues, and we're trying to do that. As we're talking about here already, that part of being an ally is joining those movements where you can be helpful to those people who are leading those movements. And Jen, you brought another question about another nuance of being an ally, and that is when you see or hear some of the ugliness or the negative, how to step into that as an ally. And so, Jen,
and to even work past it, I guess. And so I wanted to share some of the thoughts, some of the things that I've been experiencing,
yes.
And then ask your thoughts on it, and then also be able to respond, share that with others and be able to work past that, because I think that we really do, if we're going to get to the heart of these issues, we need to be able to understand it and be able to work past it and share. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that's sort of receiving these sorts of comments. Let me just pull up my question really quickly to make sure that I word it correctly. So during my attempts at interrupting racist posts and conversations on social media, on multiple occasions, I've been sent clips of various prominent people of color, including Morgan Freeman and others, stating that systemic racism and white privilege are lies. And to me, this indicates, they're trying to shut down the conversation. And honestly, as a white person, how could I possibly know that this is true? Because here are people of color saying it is not true. So I've attempted to counter it with related facts and statements, videos of history and on the system. But I wondered what your perspective on this was, if you had any thoughts and advice for us to appropriately address these.
Well, I'll just start by saying Morgan Freeman, you use his as one example. He's just one voice. And I don't know what other videos have been shown, but systemic racism is real. It persists in our schools, it persists in our courts, it persists in our voting system. It's real. I think that I think you suggested that you've been countering some of those videos or comments with facts. And so I could only just suggest that you continue to do that. Talk about the disparities in this country and how they are the result of systemic racism. But one thing I also just wanted to talk about is, we talked about in another video about the heart. I mean, sometimes you have to make a judgment about, if that's how much energy you're going to put into some of that. There's some people who are truly interested in learning and understanding and make a change and being helpful. But there's some people who really are not interested. So you could respond with all kinds of information day after day after day. But until they're actually really interested in really changing or being an ally, I feel like it's almost like a waste of time. So I think in terms of responding to those things, it just depends on who you're talking to. Are these people you know? Are these random people on the internet who you don't know anything about? Because again, you know, a lot of this is heart, your mind, your desire to be different, your desire to really learn versus just to argue and put out information that, you know, that is divisive. And again, Morgan Freeman and other people, that's their opinion. You know, within any group of people, there's going to be a range of opinions of things. There's always going to be someone who believes X and another one believes Y. But I've always tried to, you know, in these conversations and then just in my dealings, focus on the facts, focus on the studies. You know, the facts are that there is great wealth disparity in this country. The facts are that Black people have experienced lots of discrimination on the job. They've experienced discrimination in lending, which both those things promote inequities in wealth. Last week, I pointed to an information which is on the website about disparities in lending. I pointed to an article about how Wells Fargo had to pay millions of dollars because, you know, the government found 34,000 instances of Wells Fargo charging African Americans and Hispanics higher fees and rates on mortgages compared with white borrowers with similar credit profiles. They found that in 4,000 of those cases, minority borrowers were steered into subprime mortgages, even though they qualified for cheaper loans. Yeah. That's just, you know, that's just one
how many cases?
Well,
34,000 cases.
Yeah.
Tell Morgan Freeman that.
So that's systemic. That's not an accident. That's not just someone made a mistake. That's systemic. Systemic means that systems and institutions have policies that have a disparate impact on Black people. It means that, you know, as we Black people try to navigate, whether it's schools, housing, police, criminal justice system, that there are people, policies, and actions that make it harder for us to do well or get fair treatment in those systems. Let's just quickly, I just want to say one more thing about that. Because there's disparities in all kinds of, well, let me just say two things actually. One, in education.
In every institution of this country. Healthcare, education, political, criminal justice.
I mean, Black children, for example, in schools are at least 3 times more likely to be suspended. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but basically, Black children are sort of criminalized. You know, behavior that one child does is viewed one way, same behavior for another child is viewed a different way. And so we need to sort of address, you know, why is it that Black children are suspended like that? And we need to make changes to schools such that that doesn't happen. Voting rights. I think, as you know, yesterday, Congressman John Lewis passed.
Yes.
And he was very active in civil rights. And, you know, one of the things that he worked on was voting rights.
Yep.
And he was involved with the marches from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. He was beaten severely during the Bloody Sunday beating of the protesters. Well, you know, out of that march, out of those marches and lots of other efforts as well, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. And one of the things that accomplished was literacy tests and poll taxes and other things that were put in the way of voting were eliminated.
Right.
One important aspect of that law was what's called pre-clearance. And that means that different states who had a history of doing things that made it harder for Black people to vote had to get any changes they wanted to make to their voting system approved by the Justice Department. So they had to pre-clear them through the Justice Department.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just a few years ago, I think it was like 2014, the Supreme Court gutted that. It said that those states that had a history of discrimination no longer had to get their changes pre-cleared. And as I saw a quote from John Lewis on the television last night, he said before the ink had even dried on that Supreme Court decision, states, particularly states run by Republican governors and legislatures, were changing the rules. They were changing them just like that.
To make it harder for Black people to vote.
Reducing the number of polling locations, reducing the early voting opportunities, adding ID requirements, just all kinds of things that made it harder for people to vote. Why is it that in this country where voting is so important, the center of our democracy, that people are making all kinds of efforts to keep people from voting?
Mm-hmm.
That's systemic. That's systemic. That's not an accident.
No, it's a lie. It's an accident.
It's a lie. Yeah.
It's not happening.
I mean, come on.
Please.
It's making it harder for people to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And you've seen in this pandemic where all these instances where people are supposed to be at home to be safe, and people and efforts to make it easier for them to vote from home. All of those kind of things have been fought, not put in place, so that you see these long lines in Wisconsin and I think it was in Georgia. People are supposed to be at home in a pandemic. They're staying hours and hours in line. That's not a mistake.
No,
That's institutional racism.
Yes.
That's systemic racism. So, people can send all kinds of videos out about all miscellaneous people deciding there's no institutional racism, but you and I know that this country knows how to, we can accomplish all kinds of things. We can send people to the moon. We can do all kinds of things, but we can't figure out how to vote such that people aren't standing 6 and 8 hours in line.
Right.
They know that these things are going to discourage people from voting.
Right.
May I say something?
Yes.
A part of this question was the assertion that white supremacy and institutional racism are lies.
Yes.
Yeah.
When tens of thousands of white people join people of color in affirming that there is systemic racial injustice in this country, and that white supremacy and white privilege, that's what you said, white privilege. When they've said that white privilege is real and that systemic racism has permeated all of the institutions of this country, and they've said that they have benefited as white people simply because they were born white, I don't have, when you have that reality, I don't have any time, any patience for people who will then come along and say, systemic racial injustice is a lie. White privilege is a lie. This reminds me very much of the COVID-19 pandemic. People
It's
have
very,
affirmed
very similar.
that COVID-19 is a hoax.
Yeah, yeah.
But they very quickly stop saying that when they get the coronavirus, or when someone whom they love is afflicted with the coronavirus.
Yeah.
Now, I'll just say one more thing about money and wealth. And I'm not trying to pick on this man, Morgan Freeman, because there are a lot of people, if he in fact said this.
Well, it might have even been twisted. I don't know.
I don't know either. But the point is this. When you have the do-re-mi, the money that a person like that has, you have the ability to shield yourself from much of the racial injustice that we see in our society. And you have the ability to surround yourself with other humans who believe that craziness. I don't mean
benefited off of the system. They've made it through the system or benefited.
That's right. Money lightens, as a Latino said many, many years ago. Money lightens. Money has a way of helping people remove themselves from some of these issues that they say are lies. We'll just leave it there.
Sure.
There's some good passion around that question. We can feel that. So let me push us to, I think, what is a next logical step in this conversation. So Jen points out, we can have millions of people of color that are saying there is systemic racism, and somehow someone won't listen to the voice of millions, but they'll listen to one person of color who says it, right? This week and last week, we came back to the idea and the concept of it being a heart issue, that some people just don't have a heart. Maybe they don't have a heart. They certainly don't have a heart that they are interested at all in being changed. Which then makes me think about what we need to do as parents. We're all parents here. Some of us are grandparents. What we need to do with the next generation to make sure that they grow up with a heart that can be changed when it needs to be changed. And we've talked some about that, but Eric in particular brought a question in terms of his grandchildren, but I think it also might lead us to a conversation, a broader conversation of how we engage the next generation in this conversation so that they grow up with hearts that can be changed when they need to be changed. So Eric, do you want to ask that question, and we'll see where we go?
Yeah, I wanted to comment first. I'm so glad you mentioned about the passing of just this American hero, John Lewis. Just a guy that I've admired so much, and expanding on the idea of heart. You mentioned it in the past conversation, and I that is so important. Change of heart, as much as we talk about change of laws and so forth. So I just agree. So, and now I've just lost the question. Hold on. Here we go. I'll just read it. As Caucasian grandparents, us, of mixed race twin grandchildren, boy and girl, 6 years old, parents of a lesbian daughter and her African-American wife, all of whom we love and support very much, As time goes on, what kinds of race relation conversations would you recommend having with both of our grandchildren, as well as any recommendations for our daughter and her wife in their similar discussions with their twins?
So start. I think that generally speaking, for any parents and grandparents, that conversations about race and racism be ongoing conversations. Like, they're not necessarily something that happens at any particular point in time. They're not just these, okay, let's sit down and have our race conversation. They're conversations that you have just in your daily life as things are happening. For example, if you see something on the news that you know, that could spark a conversation about either how someone was treated, or why that happened to that person, or just what the implication of that story is. For example, obviously, the situation with George Floyd, his murder, is a topic that that should be discussed with children, to understand the background of that, and why people are protesting that action. Things like interactions at school, interactions in stores, just pointing out things as you go through life. If you hear someone saying something that is inappropriate or racist, discuss why that is. Buy books, introduce children to books, one that have interracial kind of characters or people in them. I know as a parent, particularly when my daughter was a little younger, whenever I look for books for her, one of the things I looked at was, were there diverse children in them? So those are just examples. Also introduce them to history of Black people. Make sure that as I would say, the history is complete. You know, in schools, unfortunately, there's the full story isn't told in terms of Black history, Black contributions. So make sure that, you know, you're conscious of what's being taught, and supplement what's being taught, whether it's with books or experiences, going to museums, going to different community activities. So those are some of the things that I think that all parents need to do in order to move this country forward in an anti-racist other manner. And one more thing I just want to say before I'll stop is, you have to examine yourselves to make sure that you are being good role models. I happened to come across a quote this week as I was just going through some papers. And the quote is from James Baldwin, and it says, "Children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them."
Sure.
And so I think all parents should look at, you know, am I saying or doing things that reflect either some racism, or am I doing or saying things reflect that I am open and friendly and wanting and have experiences with diverse communities? Are you involved with activities that bring you in contact with people of different groups? Children need to know that other groups of people are not the other. I mean, we're all part of the community. We're not like, you know, the other people. And they will know that these other groups are not the other people because your family has interactions with people of all races and ethnicities and diversity. And so I think one needs to just make sure that one is a good role model for kids in terms of the things that you're doing, as well as introducing them to, you know, Black history and Black people, whether through your books, your activities, the movies, the things that you do.
Sure.
I like this idea of eliminating the other.
Yeah.
Je suis un autre. I am the other. And that is not to say that we don't recognize differences in other people. There are, in fact, real differences in other people that we should recognize and celebrate. And racial differences, of course, is just one of those differences. So we should never be guilty of saying, we are all the same. Those people over there are not Black, they're just humans. They're just alive. We need to affirm that there are racial differences. And so one of the conversations, in my view, that need to happen in all of our homes is the conversation that race is real. To say that there is not race, it's just the human race, I think is rather dangerous, especially for children of color, especially for people of color, to promote this colorblind idea. It's very dangerous because race is a social construction that has very real and different implications for people of different races. When I walk into a room, people know I'm a Black man. And the way they respond to me is very different than the way they would respond to a white man or a white woman. Race is real, and the differences in race are very real as well. The differences in how people are perceived and how they are dealt with are very real. I think another conversation that needs to happen is that we should love ourselves, all of ourselves, all aspects of who we are. Your grandchildren and mine, should I ever have any, need to know that they are loved and that they should love themselves. One of the conversations that I think mixed race children need to have with their primary caregivers, whether they are parents or grandparents or others, is that mixed race people, especially light-skinned mixed race people, have to deal with a special brand of racism. Often these people are liked for the wrong reasons. Alina Horn, a very light-skinned Black woman who could pass for white, has talked about what a number of people in my own experience have talked about, and that is being liked for the wrong reason. People think they're white and they like them, they befriend them because of this assumption that they are white. And some are unpleasantly surprised when they learn that these people that they've been interacting with as white folks are not white, or that these people that they've been interacting with whom they think are white don't like their racist jokes, and they challenge them about it. And suddenly, you know, the reality is there that they have been assuming that these folks are white, accepting them because they're white, and they are not. I think parents need to answer their children's questions about race and racism with the same candidness with which they're asked. I don't think we should try to shield our children from things. They are handling issues that we don't even think about them having to handle today and in this society. And so if they are candid, or when they are candid about asking us about race and racism, we should be as candid in our responses. Parents need to talk to their children about race. And it is parents and grandparents who need to initiate these conversations. Do not wait for children to ask you, because what happens then is that our society will have taught our children all kinds of lessons about race before we ever get a chance to get a word in edgewise. As Trina said, we need to have these conversations all the time, at the dinner table, at the breakfast table, while we are shopping, while we're driving in the car. We need to initiate conversations about race and racism so that our children understand our values about these things. My child, Armani, whom all of you know, came to me one day and said, I think Donald Trump needs to have a copy of my social studies book. And I said,
that would be true.
Why do you think that? She said, because he needs to know that Mexicans are people too. And we had what I think was a very good discussion about race and racism and Mexicans and Blacks and white people, and the reality that we are all humans, but we are all different racially, ethnically, and that needs to be valued. You and your children and your grandchildren need to have a conversation about identity, racial identity and ethnic identity, and you need to decide who you are early. You need to decide how your racial and ethnic identity fits with who you are and how you interact in your society. Our race and our ethnicity are very real aspects of who we are as humans and how we move through and negotiate in our world. And so that is a very important conversation that we need to have. I think related to this is a series, no, not a series, research that CNN contracted with Margaret Beale Spencer, research on race and children and race. CNN contracted this study a number of years ago, but you can still see the results of it online.
Okay.
What is that man's name? Tall, thin.
Report on CNN.
Yes, what is his name?
Anderson
White.
Cooper? Anderson Cooper?
That's the one.
Oh, wow.
Anderson Cooper and what is this other woman's name? She is a Black woman, and they reported on this study together.
Is she CNN too?
I don't think she's with CNN anymore.
I know.
Well, if you think of it, maybe you can just give
We'll
it.
look that up. Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
look that up.
This study is about children and race, and you will be amazed as a number of white parents were about their children's responses regarding race. you will be amazed at how racist these children were at 5 years old, 7 years old, 12 years old. I remember one woman reduced to tears when she saw how racist her child responded to a question in this study. And she said, I'm a teacher. I've been teaching children to value and appreciate each other all these years, and I can't believe my own son is so racist. And one of the mistakes that this woman made was never talking to her child about race. She had all these good values about race. She never communicated them to her child. And here she found out, you know, he is responding and behaving in this very racist way.
Yes.
So if you could look at some of those videos,
That would be good.
I think it would be very, very helpful.
Yeah, this is and this is a great point for me, or a great place for me to interject. So we will put that study up in these resources. A number of other things that we mentioned today, we will put in the ongoing list of resources. And as the branches have said, having these conversations early and often is important, which is why we continue to have these conversations. I imagine there will be some more of these conversations in the future, but our encouragement, of course, is for this not to be the one conversation that you have about race this week, but for this to be one of the conversations that you have about race this week. So we have
related to that.
Yeah, please.
This phenomenon is real as well. White people typically don't talk about race. In general, they don't talk about race in their homes, with each other, or with their children. People of color are having these conversations all the time because they know it's necessary. Their children need to know about race. They need to know what color they are. They need to know about the very different treatment that they get. And Pastor is giving me the high sign. That clock. So I'll just stop talking.
Good point.
Well, I want to say one of the things that we are trying to do is in this church here in Chula Vista is to make this a part of our regular conversation. No matter, and we have a fairly diverse church, but still predominantly Caucasian, and we are wanting to have this conversation time and time again, early and often, with all of our folks, including our kids. And to the branches, I'm so thankful that you continue to be willing to have this conversation with us and to lead these conversations. And as Dr. Branch, it is at the end of our time. I want to honor that, but I want to, Petrina and Dr. Branch, to give you final thoughts or final words that you might share before we end this conversation today.
I'm not going to say anything else. We'll just hold on to that till next time. But we do enjoy these conversations. It is refreshing to be with people who don't mind talking about race, who recognize that we need to talk about race, that this conversation has not taken place often enough. So if you can start more conversations like this in your homes, in your families, in your churches, do it.
Right. And I just want to quickly close. We've already mentioned it before, but I just again wanted to mention Congressman John Lewis and just encourage people to share with their families his story. There's books, movies, articles about him. The movie Selma, which we mentioned before in previous talks, kind of talks about, the situations, Selma to Montgomery March. So again, I just wanted to remember him and just, again, honor him and just hope that everyone educates themselves about what he was about and what he accomplished.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us today, for entering into this conversation. And for those watching, listening, our prayers are with you. Our hope is that you might enter into a conversation of your own, in person, on Zoom, in some way, and that together we might fashion this world to be more of what we believe God designed it to be. So God bless. Have a great day.